This is Studio 809.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcon. You can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media, my photography website, my newspaper columns, all the other podcasts we've done. You can also subscribe to my newsletter or drop me an email. Tell me if there's something you want to hear or a guest you'd like to hear about and have them on the podcast. We'd love to hear from you. And you can also support this podcast at Patreon, patreon.com/hikingbob, and become a member and get rewarded depending on your level of participation. We could always use the support. Matter of fact, thanks to our patrons, we have new recording equipment, this new service that we use that makes our recordings online so much better. So we appreciate all the patrons who help us out here. Today I have a special guest who's written a really great book, and it's from Falcon Guides, who writes some really great books about outdoor recreation and hiking and all that kind of stuff. It's Surviving the Trail, 5 Essential Skills to Prepare Every Hiker for Adventure's Most Common Perils. It's written by Dr. Rob Scanlon, who is... Well, he's from the East Coast, but we're not going to hold that against him. He's not out here in the high country, but that's okay. He's got plenty of experience. He's written a lot of great stuff. Rob, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on, Bob.
It's great to have you on here. So I wrote a little bit about this book in a previous newspaper column. I did a little review of it. And what I liked about it, and we'll get into details about it, but what I liked about it was it's really simple stuff. Sometimes you see these books and you're like, you know, here's how you can slaughter a cow and make it into a shelter. And, you know, it's like a little bit survivalist stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not the kind of stuff I think that the average hiker needs to worry about. But your book went into that a little easier. Talk to us about how you, I guess let's start off with the beginning. How did you come to write this book, and what was your experience and what led you to writing this?
So I started hiking in 2002. I was in the Scouts earlier in life, but I really took to the outdoors after that in 2002, and I started out in clinical practice, and it was just really just a diversion from what you go through Monday to Friday. And so we would meet up in just outside Harriman State Park in lower New York State, and go out and just enjoy it. And the more I did it, the more I loved it. And, but then, the doctor in me, of course, my antennas are up as far as, I just have an innate empathy for, and especially unnecessary disease and death. And when the internet flourished, and which was not at that time, we started seeing more news come out, and certainly as a hiker, these news reports of, hiker dies from X, rescued for Y, this, that, and the other thing would just start popping in my head. And I'm one that, try not to make mistakes of your own, learn from others who've done that. So so I would start, learning from these things. Just sort of look back and say, right, what did they do wrong, and what could they have done differently? As much as you can know about those things, and so incorporated that in my pre-hike prep, because I don't want to make it to a news headline, and I think a lot of the listeners can relate. And so over the years, certainly distracted professionally and such, and and here come the headlines, and it's just almost on virtual repeat, all the same. You get a bear attack here and there, or a rattlesnake bite, whatever, but the vast majority of instances are dehydration, heat injury, hypothermia, falling, drowning, and getting lost. And if you pay attention to those headlines, most of that is comprising those headlines. It's at some point it was a slow evolution to this, but I said it's interesting. All this is happening. All these people are getting plucked out of the wilderness, but nobody's really guiding them on how to do it better. like, when you look at the comments section, and there's a lot of people who are like, oh, that's Darwinism, or, they lack common sense. But honestly, it's not common sense unless it's common knowledge. And it's not common knowledge how much water to bring and how to layer when you're on the move, and, how to cross a mountain stream the correct way, and how not to get lost. And so unless that becomes common knowledge, it shouldn't be common sense. And for the people who preach Darwinism, if that were, God forbid, your loved one, would that be your same response? I don't think so. So it's an innate insensitivity to losses that, or these aspects of hiking that don't impact you personally. And so I said, someone's just got to put all this information together in one place where people can just go, because it's a steep learning curve, as most of us can attest to. Amassing all, making all the wrong moves and everything else, and incorporating that into your hike routine takes a long time, and you can get caught in these traps very easily. And so I was distracted by the pandemic. And and I was not living life. I was working constantly, nonstop, not sleeping, not doing anything but seeing people die of an illness that I could not treat. And after 2 years, I was completely defeated. And my sense of I want to do for humanity more than I've been able to do, and to make up for that, I said, you know what? I'm just going to sit down and write this damn book. I don't know if anyone's going to read it. I don't know if it's going to leave my laptop, but it just got to start typing. And that's basically how it came about.
So your specialty, according to your bio, your specialty is you're board certified in pulmonary medicine and critical care, ICU kind of stuff. So people who are more critically ill, kind of stuff you do. Did you spend time, I imagine you probably did during your internship or whatever, your residency, you spend time in emergency rooms or trauma centers and see some people come in with some of these injuries?
Yeah. And I'm not in a big hiking area, but certainly we have, people are found in a ditch, perhaps inebriated and hypothermic and such, heat injury. I'm now in the southeast, so the summers get hot, and you have people come in overheated, and so we're not necessarily seeing hikers where I work as much as we're seeing these other things from just garden variety life.
It's still kind of environmental. You're still seeing environmental stuff, even if it's not directly from hiking or anything like that.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you took the approach that it's just let's educate people. I've always tried to do that. I see the comments like you do, like, look at this idiot, look what he did. I'm always like, let's just turn this into a learning experience. Other than for people who are just blatantly, I draw the line at people who do stuff that's blatantly illegal. If you go past the sign that says don't go here, or you go into Yellowstone and decide you're going to wade through the pools, there you're an idiot. But if you're just out there, most people, I think, and it seems like you're on the same page, get into trouble because they just don't know better. And there's not a school for hiking. We go to driving school to learn how to drive. You go to flying school to learn how to pilot an airplane. You can go to school to learn how to take a boat out on the ocean or something like that. But there's not. I mean, there are things you can learn formally, but there's really not a school for hiking. And there's a lot of bad advice out there.
Yes.
There's an Arizona hiking group on Facebook, and somebody was asked a question one day about, I'm a hiker, but I want to become a backpacker. What do I have to do? What's the difference? And I said, well, there's a lot of difference. That you're carrying a bigger load, you're going slower. And somebody goes, no, it's the same thing. Just put on the pack and go. And I'm going, that's the worst advice in the world. It's like you need different kind of boots because you're carrying a heavier load. You're going to go slower. Your backpack's going to be heavier. You got to carry more than just 1 or 2 bottles of water. You've got to have all this stuff in back. So there's a lot of bad advice out there. And I'm not saying I always have the best advice. I tell people I work with, I have great ideas. I have a lot of ideas. Not all the time are they great ones, but I have all kinds of ideas. Sometimes they're actually pretty bad ideas. What do you see as, in the research you did for this book, what do you see as like one of the biggest things that people do wrong? What do you see that was there even one thing that you saw that people do that gets them in trouble?
It's a great question. Well, I have two comments on that. So from personal observation, if you sit at the trailhead long enough and you watch enough people coming on trail, you'll see people dressed the wrong way. All right, big deal. But have nothing on them. They don't have a pack. They don't have water. They don't have anything. And we don't know how far they plan on going into the backcountry, but certainly they're starting off on the wrong foot. No pun intended there. You mentioned environmental. I think the biggest thing that we can try to avoid is getting lost, because getting lost automatically prolongs your time out there. If it's cold, if it's hot, you're going to be in those conditions that much longer. You're going to run out of water. You're going to run out of food. You might need shelter if you're there past sundown, if you don't have a headlamp on you to help guide your way. And so that is sort of like the pathway to dehydration, hypothermia, heat injury, whatever environmental exposure there is. And even if it's the summer, if it was hot during the day and you had t-shirt and shorts on, nightfall, it might go down in the 40s. And then you're really screwed if you got nothing on you and you got lost. So I think getting lost is probably the most important of them, that to really get nailed down in solid and bulletproof, so that whatever you came prepared for is how it ends and how it unfolds.
So I guess getting lost would probably go with underestimating how much time you would need.
Yes.
Did you find that that's an issue? People who maybe not experienced hikers think they're going to be doing 3 miles an hour, which everybody would love to do. I aim for 3 miles an hour on a trail, but that's often, because of a number of different things, just not possible. Did you find that secondary to that was people just being out longer than they wanted to and getting stuck in some of those environmental issues that you talked about?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, and they might be able to approach 3 miles an hour on the flats, but let's say it's a lot of uphill, and you might be more like 1.8 or 2.2, and then even without getting lost, you're out there much longer if it's the longer the hike is, the distance, the longer the distance is, and so yes. And it's common for people not to start early in the morning. They might, I'm going to sleep in, and I got to meet Joe at Denny's, and we had a longer breakfast. And by the time we get out to the trail, it's 1 o'clock. Putz around for a half an hour, and then let's go. And it was supposed to be a 6-hour hike, and then it turns out to be 8, and it's nightfall, and yeah, exactly. So starting out later, you're that much closer to sundown, and things almost never go the way you plan it anyway. And so yes, so that's definitely a big part of that, is the unknown extension of the hike.
And I one of the things I noticed in your book is almost all these, I shouldn't say almost all, a large number of these incidents. And what I like in your book is when you start off a new chapter, you start off with real life incidents that have occurred that will relate to what you're going to write about in the next chapter, the next hydration strategy and all those things, weather and managing body temperature. You start off with examples of incidents that happen where that next chapter is going to talk about how to prevent those. I guess the second part of this is you talked about people not being dressed properly. And of course, that could be a subjective thing. I did a whole podcast on we're not going to pick on people because they wear Lululemons when they're out hiking instead of, blue jeans. I mean, people wear what they wear. We can kind of advise them, blue jeans aren't a great idea. They're cotton. We don't like that. But people do go out there without having oftentimes a sense of the right clothing. For example, right now here in Colorado, you're on the East Coast, so your weather's probably a little warmer than it is here. We're having really warm days, but the minute the sun goes down, the temperature drops 20, 30 degrees.
Right.
I spend a lot of time in Arizona in the spring, and I don't know if you've hiked in the desert, but in the spring, the same thing happens there. It could be 85, 90 degrees, but when that sun goes down, oh man, does it get chilly.
Yes.
Are you finding that equipment is also a thing, what people are carrying with them? Is that kind of the thing? Or does that get them into trouble, or does that just make the trouble they get into worse?
Well, I think it ties into what you were saying before. I think there's just a lot of people who get out there not knowing what they don't know. And often are, like, let's say, they travel to Sedona from wherever, from Cleveland. They don't expect that, the desert, it's hot during the day, never been here before, but it's probably going to be hot at night. And, and like I said, it's not the case. And a lot of, especially in the desert, even in the dead of the summer, it'll still drop. So not coming with these things just because they didn't know, I think is probably a big part of it. I think there's probably more attention paid to keeping the pack, the hyper light crowd. I don't think 5 pounds, to have a mid or a shell in your pack is going to slow you down one bit. I come from the school of, better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So I'm usually packed for bear when I get out. But yeah, so certainly lack of equipment, probably not through indolence, but probably more through just lack of awareness of that temperature variation between day and night.
You talked about the real life scenarios, and I think they're great because I think they really bring it home to people. And the other part of the book that I liked was you give examples of things. We talk about, I've talked about it, and I'm sure you mentioned it in here, that, wearing cotton is not a great idea. Out here we talk about cotton kills because I did a little talk with a small group of hikers a couple of weeks ago, and I said, try not to wear cotton. And the answer was like, well, cotton breathes. I said, yeah, it breathes, but it kind of does, but it also retains the moisture to your skin. And it's like, how to do that. But you actually write in here about examples of evaporation and why that's important. And how does evaporation affect us off trail? I'm looking through this, and I've read the book, and I'm going back through because I read the book a couple weeks ago. But how that all, why that makes a difference, why wool and synthetics are better than cotton. Although I would think cotton would be great, right? It's a natural fiber, but it doesn't work. It's not a great idea at all.
Works against us. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of traps everything against your skin, and like I tell people, you can sweat out here in the winter while you're snowshoeing. I've done it. It's easy to overdress and get sweaty, but the minute you stop and you start generating heat, all that moisture is trapped against your skin, and all of a sudden now you're freezing.
Exactly.
And it's easy to forget that. You also talk in here about things you can do, because it is about surviving the trail, not just preparing for it. You talk about things you can do when something happens. How did you gather that information? I mean, you're a doctor. You're not necessarily a first responder. Did you spend a lot of time talking to search and rescue teams and park rangers to get an idea of what they could do if something happens on the trail?
Actually, this I know from just my medical training, and I am a member of the Wilderness Medical Society, so we go through a lot of these things in the conferences as well. But going back to your prior point about sort of like the structure of each chapter, and the only way I knew to structure it was really how I talk to patients about being better stewards of their body. Let them know, open their eyes to that. XYZ is real. It's not something that somebody's heard of somewhere and doesn't happen. This stuff happens. This is why it happens and how it happens. And these are the things you can do to recognize when it happens. These are the things you can maybe do when it happens. But ultimately, we want to prevent all that. We want to avoid all that. So, using the prior knowledge of all that, these are the things that we can, and it's very understandable at that point, what we can do for ourselves to prevent it all. And and that's kind of the structure that the only way I knew to say it. And so field treatment is something I've read about through just the field guides and field medicine and such. In just being a doc and knowing how to do this, the thing that fascinates me about wilderness medicine is be able to do a lot with very little. In austere circumstances, when you have very, very little on you, you can make slings and crutches and all kinds of different things from what you have in the environment. So that's definitely a fascination for me. In the ICU, it's pretty intense stuff, but as opposed to in the ER, when they're walking into a situation, they don't know anything about this person when they walk in the room, and they got to figure it all out. It's kind of all figured out by the time they get to the ICU. There's plenty we got to figure out along the way, but it's almost like I have all the somebody's done the X-ray or the CAT scan or the lab work and everything else, and I can look back and say, oh well, you guys got it wrong. It's this now that I have it all in front of me. So I don't envy the position of the ER docs, by the way, But so for me, it is actually good to get in touch with that part of me that is like, well, can I do just as much without any of those things? And it certainly helps you become a better doctor when you have those things, because it helps you think differently about how to approach different disease states.
And what I liked about this was even the treatments you give for different injuries or whatever may happen to you on the trail. And it's not just about being injured. It's also about if you're lost and how to get out of that. Is with stuff that I wouldn't have carried with me as an EMT, and you're not going to carry with you as a doctor. It's stuff that just people are going to have me. I always recommend people take even the most basic first aid class and carry some kind of first aid kit with them. But it's also pretty simple stuff. Like we talked earlier, it's not survivalist kind of training. It's surviving training, and there's a big difference in that and everything in there. And I guess we should mention, too, that not everything that happens is because people don't know what to carry or aren't prepared. You talked about people go out on a trail and they think it's going to be a short hike, but your one loose rock and a twisted ankle or a blown out knee, that's not your fault.
Right.
It could happen to anybody.
Right.
To bam, absolutely. Now you're stuck and you're calling for help. And how do you handle that until help gets to you?
Right. Right.
I think that's important to remind people. Like, I think I'm very well prepared. And I was the subject of a search and rescue mission at one point. And it happened to me. And I like to think I know what the hell I'm doing, but it doesn't always work that way. And I could always, people listen to podcasts know I've been dealing with an ankle injury for better part of 2 years now and finally getting over it. One twisted ankle, one rolled out rock, one tripping over a root, one slipping on ice or something like that. And you could be the most prepared person in the world, and you're the injured and lost most prepared person in the world.
Right. We'll never eliminate search and rescue, and I fully acknowledge that there's plenty of things that are going to happen out of left field that you couldn't possibly prepare for. But you talk to search and rescue professionals, and to a person, they will tell you that more than 50% of their calls are for things that the hiker could have totally prevented. And what your listeners may not know is that at least a big part of why we are losing these individuals, and they're mostly volunteers. They're voluntarily leaving their kids' ball games and dance recitals and leaving the dinner table or leaving work and going on a helicopter or a truck or whatever and getting on foot to find these individuals and find a way to extract them out of the wilderness. These people do not grow on trees, but we're losing them by attrition because they're frustrated. And that, for all of us who want to continue wandering for as long as we can, like you, we might all need that someday. And we are theoretically waiting longer and longer for fewer people who are bogged down by things that are not necessary. And so how do we break this cycle? And so so this book really just goes after the low-hanging fruit, the things that we can impact. We can't predict, when we're going to roll our ankle. We can't predict, we can't control, how bears are going to react. We can't control that we didn't see the snake that we stepped on that bit us, whatever. But we can control how much water we bring, how we dress, how we behave at cliffs' edges, and how we cross streams, and how we mitigate our chances of getting lost. That's stuff we can master. It is doable, and so for the people who recognize that they may need some extra help in that, and this is a one-stop place to go, because it's not new information that I've put in this book. The only thing new, I would say, that I've contributed is I've seen no guide whatsoever on how to determine exactly how much fluid, I'll say fluid instead of water, but how much fluid you're going to need for any kind of hike at all. You plug in the handful of major points that determine your hydration needs into this table, and you come out with your hourly needs for fluid. That's the first I've ever seen, and I think it's really necessary. But otherwise, none of this other stuff is really new, but it's scattered all over the internet, and it's just very extraordinarily difficult to amass. It's hidden in medical journals. It's hidden in, U.S. Army has done a bunch of studies, and I referenced those. Other books, and just, all over the place. And so, I think I said it before, I was like, somebody's just got to put all this stuff together and make it understandable. And anyway, so that's kind of how it is.
I'm looking at that chart you're talking about, the fluid needs chart, and I have never seen all that in one place. My advice has always been, especially to new hiker, I know how much water I typically need, but that's years of experience. I know how much I need.
Exactly.
But I will tell you that I don't drink enough water, but that's just normal for me. I just don't drink enough water during the day when I'm not hiking, when I am hiking, but I know how much I need to bring based on what my experience is. A lot of people just have no idea. Do they carry a gallon of water, or do they carry a quart, or do they carry, what do they carry? And I've always told people, carry as much as you can carry, and over the course of time, you'll figure out how much you need. And of course, water is heavy, almost 9 pounds per gallon, so it's heavy. Yeah. I tell people, well, the way to get that weight off your back is to drink it. If you drink it, it comes off your back. But I love this chart here, and of course, it's a start. People will figure out if they need more than this, if they need less than this, what their normal thing is. But I've never seen, and maybe I just missed it. Who knows? I don't swear to know everything, but I've never seen this chart in one place where all this stuff is laid out. But it's got your hiking pace in different categories and terrain and forecasted temperature and humidity, and then at the bottom it tells you how much water based on all those things that you need. I think it's a great chart to have to get people started. You also go into things like land navigation and crossing waterways, which can be tricky, especially if you're here in the mountains when the spring runoff happens. I've actually had an incident where I was it was early in the spring, the runoff was happening. On the way up, I crossed across this little waterway pretty easy. When I came back 2 hours later, that waterway was a whole lot different than when I went up, and it was a little tricky. Not that it wasn't very wide. I was still able to get across it pretty easily, but it had changed a lot in the course of a couple hours. So you go into how to cross a waterway, and how to do land navigation. One of the things I like is you talk about the weather a lot, and how to manage the weather. Do you also go into how to read the weather, how to look at the sky and get an idea what's coming next?
Yeah, I didn't go into the the cloud analysis. I probably should have actually, but by then you're already out there and you have what you have. But I think the forecast that I tried to point out was let's say Rocky Mountain National Park. So let's look at the forecast for Rocky Mountain National Park. It will give you the local forecast of Estes Park. But it won't tell you what the forecast is at 2,000, 3,000 feet above Estes Park, which is a whole other set of weather conditions.
Or on top of Long's Peak.
Right. And so I mentioned a couple of references in there to actually look at that specific elevation or those specific summits to get the whole other guidance on weather, at least anticipation of weather. But as we all know, as we've been up there, anything goes. I've commonly told the anecdote. I did my first Colorado 14er and it was 75 at the base, and so I'm like, awesome. But I knew to come prepared. But this was the first week of August. And when it got up to the top, it was snowing.
It does that. It does do that.
Yeah, and I was like, I'm an East Coaster. I've never seen this stuff before. Yeah. I knew enough that mountains make their own weather. Shit gets real up there, and so that's that's a. So I thankfully had enough on me to spare me any kind of pain.
The good thing about that, when it happens in August, and people are going to be like, "What? It snows in August?" It does. Yeah. Is that fortunately it's usually not a lot of snow, and it's not going to be, but it's still going to be. If it's cold enough to snow, it's not 75 degrees like when you started. So it's still darn cold enough to snow, we talked earlier before we started recording that you haven't been down this far in Colorado. You've done stuff in Rocky Mountain, but going up the Bar Trail to the top of Pikes Peak. I've been at Bar Camp, which is still below tree line, about halfway up, and I've been snowed on there in June.
Wow.
Now the caveat there is it's very light snow, not a big deal, but it was June and it was still snow, at about 10,000 feet, 10 or 11,000 feet. So it does happen, and I get a lot of emails. People find my podcast or they find my columns and they say, "Hey, I want to do Pikes Peak in January."
Good luck.
No, you really, really don't. You really don't want to do that. And I have to go into a lot of detail about why that's just generally a bad idea. But it goes back to, again, what we talked about earlier on, is they just don't know what they know. And at least they're smart enough to write to somebody who's out here and experienced it and can say, this is why this is a bad idea, and this is when you should go. And still, good luck. And here in August, if you do it in August, you're either going to have snow or you're going to get hit by lightning. One or the other is going to happen to you. So
I'll alert the mountain rescue team now.
Yeah. I actually did tell that to somebody once. Tell me what you're wearing. I'll call them up and have them watch for you. They did not think that was fun. They did not think that was very funny at all, but it is what it is. You go into land navigation. I think that's another issue. Talk a little bit about what you have found about people using apps to guide themselves as opposed to having map and compass training and experience. So
yes, we are in the digital age, and anybody who adheres to analog methods is a dinosaur. I grew up in I'll say a paramilitary home, but not military. But I always have redundancy when you can. And I myself have used the All Trails, and it's worked out fairly well. It's not 100% accurate. Nothing is. But especially when it's cold, the wilderness is where batteries go to die. And the colder it is, the faster your phone battery is going to run down. So I try to stress, if you're going to choose electronic only, okay, but make sure you have at least a battery bank to back up on that. And but know how to use the analog methods as your plan B. It's crazy what people will do in a survival situation in order to live. And I think we should harness that innate will to live ahead of time enough to allow us to learn the things that keep us away from the survival scenario altogether. And it's not hard stuff. And it is certainly anything but a comprehensive land navigation course. But what I've outlined is the handful of map and compass skills that will get you in and out in one piece. And if you really just concentrate on the competency of those things, you'll get to where you need to be or get out of there at all costs. When I start out on a hike, I'll orient the map to the terrain. I will get the general bearing of the trail, and no trail goes in a straight exact line, but I'll just go right down the middle, and I'll say, all right, so it follows a bearing of X. All right, so DEFCON 1 situation. I don't know where the hell I'm going. I'm going to head to 180 degrees from bearing X. I don't care if I have to blaze my own trail through the whole damn thing. That is where I'm going, because that is where the road is. That is where the trailhead is. That is where the nearest town is, whatever. And so always picking a point of safety or the fallback position. I have a lot of friends who are former, special ops military, and you have your primary extraction point, you have your secondary extraction point, and so, if Plan A goes to crap, then you got to have a Plan B, and always plan for contingency, always have redundancy, and be competent in all of it, bring a gun to a knife fight, in essence.
No, it makes sense. Out here we talk about Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C, just about not only on the trail, but just planning where you're going to go hiking, because our trailheads fill up so fast here that you need to have a Plan A, plan just to where to go. I've told people before that I've never been lost, but there have been times where I didn't know exactly where I was. and I think the difference in that is, and the way I explained the difference, well, what does that mean? Is I know how I got there, and I know how to get out of here. But if you ask me on a map exactly where I'm at, I'm not really 100% sure. And either because I'm using an old map and the trail no longer exists, and I ended up just bushwhacking through there, or I wandered off the trail, or something happened. But I'm blessed with a good sense of direction. I can always, I rarely ever have I totally been baffled as to where I was. I'll figure it out later when I download my GPS and I look at it on the topo map that I have and look at, okay, that's where I was. But I've never been lost. And the difference is lost is where you have no clue. You don't know where you're at. You don't know how you got there. You don't know how to get out of it. You just have no idea where you're at. And it's a lot of times the simple things, like look behind you every once in a while.
Right. It looks totally different on the way back. Yeah.
And as the light changes, as the sun moves across the horizon, the light changes and everything looks different. There was a trail here that I saw on maps that was a very old trail. It has since been resurrected, but I tried several times to find it, and every time couldn't find it. And the last time I finally found it, I went in there with actually flagging tape, tying it behind me every 30 or 40 feet, just so I could figure out how to get the heck out of there. I ended up finding the trail. The next time I went through, they went through with a machete and actually cleared it, and it's been resurrected by the local parks department and redone. But it was a time of just, I knew I was getting in too far. I knew where I was, but I didn't know where I was. I knew how to get out of there, but it's like, this is not the right spot. Obviously, I'm in the wrong place. Back out, regroup, go back in. Usually a couple of days later, went back in after I looked at maps and figured out where I was and stuff like that. Is there a certain element of get there, like I like to call it, get there-itis, that people don't want to turn around and go back? Did you see that gets people into trouble?
Absolutely. Summit fever. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, it begins with the wrong priorities. In the introduction, I talked about, back to military operations. In military operations is, mission first, number one, priority. Number two is, everybody gets home. And then there's a few secondary, tertiary, quaternary goals. So the mission supersedes all other goals of when you've started out with the mindset of mission first. But hiking, we have to start out with number one, everyone gets home in one piece.
Right.
Come hell or high water. Secondary mission is, or second goal is to get to the summit or get to the alpine lake or whatever. So if you begin with that mindset of everybody gets home, then everything you do before the hike and on trail basically should subserve that primary goal. So I think it's a mindset issue. And for some reason, I think people think the summit's going away. If I don't get there today, it's not going to be there.
They've been there for a couple of million years. They're not going anywhere.
Right. It's not in some asteroid that's that you've missed.
Right.
Live to summit that another day. And so, nobody's life is worth touching the summit of that. What for? Like an Instagram picture, really?
Right. Yeah. Well, don't get me started on the influencers.
Right. Bragging rights and everything else. Yeah.
I mean, it's I'm a photographer. I go out and take pictures in the landscape. I've traveled all over the Southwest, and one of the things I like to talk about is you could do the stuff that you could go out there and get the picture you want to get. For example, I talk about Delicate Arch in Utah. Most famous arch in the world. It's on their license plate, for crying out loud. Everybody wants to go get that picture. And when you get there, you realize there's 200 other photographers lined up at sunset to get that picture. Fine, get the picture, but go do something else. I think the same thing applies. That arch isn't going to go anywhere. So if the day you get there, the parking lot's full and there's a bazillion picture there, you know what? If you come out the next day, which is not a weekend, you'll probably find the parking lot's empty. You can go up there and hike and get the picture without a bazillion other people in your way. And it's just sometimes you just have to wait. And I just came back from a trip. I was in a place I'd never been before. I had a long list of stuff to do. I did half of it because it just took longer. They're not going away. I just have to go back there another time and do the stuff I didn't do this time around.
Right. 100%.
Get away from that get-there-itis type of stuff. That thing. I was a firefighter, and I was in the military before that. You're right. The mission there is first. If I was at a fire, the mission was go in that house, save lives first, put the fire out second. And if we couldn't get the fire out from inside, we got it out from outside. We stayed safe. But this is not. I have to get myself out of that mindset, that first responder mindset. I'm not on a mission anymore. I'm retired. I can just go out and goof off and hike and go back later if I don't get it this time around.
Right. Absolutely. It's not, it's not crucial to any goal, at all to get there beyond, and the go, no go parameters are so fluid and there's no way you could just make a list of go, no go. It's got to be a gut thing. And as long as you go into it with the right mindset, then your gut should tell you that is or is not compatible with our first goal here of everybody getting home.
One of the things you talked about too is setting go no go decisions. Is when I'm out on a trail, I set, when I'm planning it, different decision points. Like if I get to this point where I can probably loop around, if I get there and it's getting later, maybe this is where I turn around. But if I'm doing okay, I'll go to the next decision point. And maybe that's where I loop around or just turn around and go back. And another decision point. And people don't always do that. They say, I got to make it to the summit. And if I don't, I'm not doing it. But sometimes it's like, well, if I get to this point, I can, and it's getting later or the weather's turning, I can loop around and still get a good hike in. Or if I get there and it's fine, I'll go to the next decision point, and decision points a lot. And I do that even when I'm hiking here in town. We have great regional parks here right in Colorado Springs in the foothills. decision points where I can turn and go back if something changes. And I think a lot of people don't plan for these different places. Where am I going to make a decision on whether I'm going to keep going or turn around? Especially when you're going up in elevation, it really gets important. Or going further into backcountry, I think that stuff really gets important in the planning process. Dr. Rob, I've taken a lot of your time. I told you I needed about an hour. We're running tight on that. I wanted to check with you and, well, tell everybody how they can find your book. Where can they find your book and where can they get a copy of it? Because I think everybody should have a copy of this and read it and understand it and then go back and pick it up a couple weeks later and read another chapter or go back over it. Where can they find your book?
Pretty much anywhere online. Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, BooksAMillion.com, I think it's bookshop.org, Walmart.com, all have it. And even local bookstore websites will have it. They just get it from distributors, etc. So it's everywhere online. I really want to, I'm trying to push to get this book into national park visitor centers, state park visitor centers. If anybody from REI is listening, it needs to be there. Yeah. So hopefully the distributor, the sales team will be interfacing with all these retailers to really get this much needed information to the people who are doing the hiking and put it where they go to shop. And if it just sits on the internet and unless somebody tells you about it, it's just going to languish out there. It needs to be read. It needs to be needs to be learned from. So hopefully it will make its way to the shelves as well.
Cool. Is there anything you wanted to chime in here about that I didn't ask you about?
No, it's really, you mentioned it's not survival, it's surviving. And I think, as many of us who know survival skills, none of us wants to actually put them into practice. And so nobody in their right mind would want to. So what is it that we can do to be as much of a guarantee that we won't be that person on the news headline or fighting for their life and scared to death. And so these are the things that we can control. And so take it. You assume that control and be a much more empowered hiker than before. One
of the things you've mentioned is being in the news, and I've started to use as my mantra, don't make your hike into a newsworthy event.
Exactly.
Because the only ones that are newsworthy events are the ones that go south. And it's like, I'm starting to develop that as nobody should know about your hike unless you tell them about it. And in my role as a journalist and having worked with Parks, I post all my hikes on one of my Facebook pages because I want people to see what I'm doing. Because if I'm going to stand here or be on this platform I have and tell people how to, where to go and stuff, they need to know that I'm actually out there doing it. So I post all my hikes. I download the GPS and I talk about where it was and how many miles it was and how many miles I've done this year and what hike done. My goal is 800 miles a year. It's going to be a little tight this year because I'm getting over an injury, but I might just do it. You do not want your hike to become a newsworthy event because unless you're setting a record of some type, if it's newsworthy, that means it went terribly wrong. I just look at the news. I mean, we just had a couple of guys who took their Jeep up on a pass over here in southwestern Colorado that had 3 feet of snow, and they thought their stock Jeep could get over it. It did not. And they became a newsworthy event because they had to be rescued. Oh. Live and learn. I'm not belittling them. It just happened. But nobody would know about their trip if they hadn't gotten stuck and had to get rescued and become a newsworthy event. So do not make your hike a newsworthy event. Make it something you share with people you want to share it with and not be greeted by news cameras when you get back from your hike. Dr. Rob, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Dr. Rob Scanlon, he wrote the book. It's at Falcon Guides. I'll include a link in the show notes. Surviving the Trail, 5 Essential Skills to Prepare Every Hiker for Adventure's Most Common Perils. But it's not just about surviving. I should say it's not about that. It's not about what to do if something goes wrong. It's how to, as Dr. Rob mentioned, how to prevent things from going wrong, how to prevent from being from needing all the other skills in this book. If you follow half the stuff, you won't even need the skills in the other half of the book. You'll be fine. Dr. Rob Scanlon, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. By all means, REI should have this in their stores. All the outdoor shops, we have a bazillion of them out here, as I'm sure you do, should have this in their stock of books, along with all the trail guides and maps and stuff like that. But thank you again for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're super busy.
No, thank you so much for having me on. This is really important stuff.
Awesome. Well, with that, everybody, thank you for listening to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. We'll talk to you next time.